Welcome back to the show. If you're watching and listening to these as they come out, you'll know it's been a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks in the COVID lockdown since the last episodes. If you're watching these at some point in the future, it won't make a difference to you. If you want to know why there was a break, sign up for my mailing list on the website, paul7cope.com. I've been updating people via there. I won't bore you with the details on here because this is about getting stuck into some really interesting stuff. If you've followed the videos and the podcast episodes, you'll know I've been addressing things as they've come up that I think or have thought would be useful for people during the coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. Fear, depression, anger, rage. The last 2 episodes especially have been quite deep and hard hitting. And I thought after having done them, I've actually started coaching people again, which I didn't intend to do actually when I set all of this up. But again, we need to adapt to our environments, and the world has maybe led me down that route. So I've started coaching people again, and doing that and seeing the range of issues that people are coming to me with for help. And it's almost sort of proven my theory that loads of the stuff we face in life comes down to the same root causes all the time. I'm all about getting to root causes. I hate the fact that in society, we're even seeing this in the way that governments are dealing with the coronavirus. We so often just deal with symptoms, and we attack symptoms, or we attack sort of high level problems. And what I see is if you dig right down and get to the root, you can solve so many things. And the root of pretty much everything we do, all of the challenges in our life come back to the same thing. So I thought, as I'm coaching these different people from different walks of life, from different countries, I thought it'd be really helpful for you, probably, for us to go back to the beginning and to start working through the stuff that I think is the root cause, or the things that are the root causes of the problems we face, and go through them step by step in a few episodes, and maybe help you to start unpicking things in your life, because that's the whole point of these shows, is to help you think about what's happening in your life that can take you from where you are. Why, if you're watching videos and listening to podcasts like these, I would guess it's because you've got some curiosity or some fascination with what I'm talking about, and that's usually because you've got that feeling inside that there's something not quite right. No matter what you're doing in your life, it's just, there's something missing. And that's where I was, going back to my origins videos, that's where I was a few years ago. And it was this stuff. I mean, the things we've talked about already, obviously, all quite impactful stuff. But going right back to the beginning and working through, I think is really helpful. And I'll say as well, it's funny because I often say, and I'll keep saying, I consider myself to be a student of all this stuff, and I always will. One of the coaches I work with a few weeks ago said something really powerful to me, which was, we get lost in life when we start seeing ourselves as masters of anything, whatever it is we're doing. If we see ourselves as a master, because it's at that point that fear kicks in and imposter syndrome can kick in, because we think we should know the answers to everything, and we can't possibly know the answers to everything. So reminding ourselves all the time that we're students, no matter how much we've learned, no matter how far down the path we are, we're always students. And I'm still a student of all this stuff, and I'm continually learning. And it's why I believe in therapy and coaching so much. I have 2 of my own coaches and a therapist still after years of working on this, and I will keep those people because I love working with them. I'm still having breakthroughs all the time, different things I'll keep talking about as we go through these shows and these topics. And going back to the root of where it all started is so key for me. Something I've noticed just as a general principle for me is, I listen to all this stuff and I take in loads of information and watch loads of YouTube videos, speak to coaches, speak to therapists, read books, listen to podcasts. And something I've noticed with me is, if I listen to something and it sounds logical, I'm like, yeah, I can see how that works. I always remember, because I've had chronic health issues over the years, which we'll get stuck more into in future episodes. One of them is a stiff neck I've had since I was 17, and a condition called ankylosing spondylitis, which causes fusion of joints and inflammation of joints. And over the years, I've tried all kinds to try and fix it. And I ended up seeing this guy in London who did something called muscle activation technique, which I read about in Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Body, I think. And he was saying to me, he examined me and he looked at my whole body and got me to stand in front of him. And he said, okay, did all these tests. And he said, right, he said, I know you're focused on your neck not working, Paul. He said, but the problem is your whole body's out of alignment. So your feet are flat. That means your ankles are weak. That means your knees are out of alignment. Your hips are out of alignment. Your spine's twisted. And that has a knock-on effect to your neck. So he said, so all the people you've seen in the past 15 years have all worked on your neck. He said, but I'm going to start by working on your feet. Because if we work on your feet, then we fix your ankles, then your knees, then your hips, then your spine, then your shoulders, because your shoulders are out of alignment as well. He said, all of that will happen and then your neck will just fix itself. Does that make sense? And I said to him, yeah, it makes perfect sense. That's logical. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you show me on one of those skeletons you see in doctors' rooms all the time. And I remember saying to him, if you told me you work on someone else's feet and it fixes my neck, then I'd be a bit more cynical. I'd be like, well, you're gonna have to explain that a bit more to me. But if you work on my feet and my ankles and my knees and blah, 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 yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I apply the same logic to everything, really. If I talk things through, it doesn't matter how complicated it is or complex. I think loads of things in life you see this in the way, watch out for this. Whenever people aren't really sure about what they're talking about, they can make it really complicated. So you can ask, if you start asking questions of someone and they get more and more sort of convoluted in how they're explaining it, it's always alarm bells for me. Because most things, don't get me wrong, there's lots of complex stuff going on. But most things, if you really understand them, you can boil them down to basics and say it's a bit like this, which is what I try to do all the time. And when you do that, if it makes logical sense to me, I'm like, yeah, okay, I can follow that works. And this stuff, as I started learning about it, I was like, wow, this is genuinely the stuff that as I started learning about was like, why the fuck do they not teach this in school? And I can get very cynical about it and conspiracy theorist about it. Go back and watch those videos if you haven't already. Because this is the stuff that frees you, as far as I'm concerned. This is the stuff that, once you start unpicking it and figuring it out, makes perfect sense. And is the stuff that, definitely for me and for other people I know, is the stuff that figuring it out and unlocking your later years leads to peacefulness inside, leads to that thing inside that never is really right and you always feel like there's something missing. It's this stuff that I'm about to talk about that solves it. So let's get stuck into it after that big long-winded intro. What I want to talk about to begin with is going right back to the beginning. And even as I say this, you might start going straight away, yeah, of course, that makes sense. We talk about all these things that are wrong in our lives as grown-ups. I've been on this planet nearly 4 decades now, 40 years in a few weeks. And it amazes me that we don't talk about this other stuff more, which is basically our childhoods, because that's where it all starts. And what I always say to people, and I've noticed me saying this more and more to people who are coach, is think about you and every baby as they come out into the world. You come out as this effectively perfect human being. You are raw, completely raw. I always compare it to computers. So again, going back to referencing previous episodes, if you haven't seen them, the ones about imagination and the stories we tell ourselves, when you're born, you don't have those things yet. You're just like a blank computer. You're just like the hardware. And all of the stuff, the software, needs to be programmed into you. And that programming is done by your immediate caregivers and the world around you, the stuff you see straight away. So for most of us, that's our mum and dad and our immediate family, plus extended family. But whoever it was that raised you, whatever environment you were in. So think about this. Something happened to me a few months ago and it made me laugh because I'd already learned all this stuff. But it was the smallest example. So I haven't eaten cereal regularly for a long time because I've learned when I was training for marathons and I'm working out loads, it's not that good for you. It's just full of shit, most of it. But I just fancied some cereal. So I'm living by myself. I'm nearly 40 years old. I haven't lived at home for, when I say home, with my parents for 20 years. And I got this box of cereal, and I'm just, I'm listening to music, I'm singing while I'm pouring myself some cereal. So I open the box. So you've got the picture, you've got, you know, the two long flaps along the top of the box. So I open them, and then there's two short flaps, you know what I mean, inside. So you open the big long ones, and then the two short ones inside. So I open the long ones, I fold out the two short ones, and then I ripped off one of them, put that to one side, opened the plastic bag on the same side I'd ripped off that cardboard piece, and poured my cereal into the bowl. And as I did that, I started laughing, because I'd done it all subconsciously. It's the autopilot thing. I don't know whether you've ever done this in other things. It comes up in lots of like business training I've had over the years. Our sort of conscious actions versus our subconscious actions. So, for example, the example they always give is when you start learning how to drive a car, you do everything consciously. So it's okay, and it's really hard. It's like clunky. It's like, okay, so I turn the engine on, and then I put my left foot down on the clutch, and then for all the people who drive manual cars, and then I change gear, and then I do this and I do that. And for the first few months of driving, that's what it is. You're constantly going through this thing. But within months or a year, you do all of this automatically, and you can even get to the point, which is dangerous, but we all do it, where you can go on a journey and you don't remember doing it because it was all on autopilot. And that's what I was doing this day. So I poured the cereal and stopped and started laughing to myself, because I thought, why do I open cereal like that? Why do I open a box of cereal like that? That's weird. And I knew why. I knew the answer straight away. It's because that's how my dad does it. My dad opens cereal like that. Because if you take off, the logic behind it is, if you don't take off that flap on the side, when you pour the cereal out, that's the flap that catches things and pushes it back into the bottom of the box. So it's a really good way to open cereal if that's not how you do it already. But the weird thing was, that's how my dad opened cereal when I was a kid. So when I'm living at home, I watch him do that, and that goes into my head as that's how you open a box of cereal. And 35 years later, I've probably started seeing him open cereal from when I was born. Nearly 40 years later, I'm still opening cereal like that without thinking about it, because that's how I was programmed to open cereal. Think about that. When you're born, you don't know how to open a box of cereal, and someone teaches you it, and that sticks. And think about that as a really small example of how we soak stuff up as a kid. That's just opening a box of cereal. So pick any other topic you want to pick. Anything. As big as you want, as small as you want, and think about where you learnt it from. Because even things like this is really powerful. We talk in society like things like love is just natural, just a natural thing. But it's bullshit. You're not born knowing how to love or knowing what love is. We're taught that. We're taught how to interact with other humans by the people around us. We watch what they do and we copy them. I heard a great line years ago, and if you've got kids, when I say this, you might start going, shit. Because I see this all the time. I don't have kids yet, but I see it with other people's kids. It was the person who said it, I remember, so I can give him credit, was the wrestler, which is crazy, Triple H. I think it was on a Tim Ferriss podcast. And he said, kids don't do what you say, kids do what you do. So the mistake loads of people make with kids is they tell them what to do whilst doing something else themselves. So a common one, which I see all the time, is we tell kids not to use their phones so much, but they're watching all the adults, and the adults are all on their phones. So they don't do what you say, they do what you do. They're just copying your behaviour. And again, that's a tangible example. But think about that in the context of everything else. So something we'll go on to talk about is relationships with other humans. You learn that from your parents or the people around you, your caregivers when you're a child. Literally everything, we're programmed. So there's more and more that topic in itself we could talk about for hours. We'll cover it more in other episodes. What I wanted to get into mainly for the purposes of this one though is how we all experience as kids trauma and neglect. And when I say that, you might immediately go, not me, mate. Like, not me, Paul. I had a good childhood. And this is something I like to talk about a lot, because something I see, I might have mentioned this in previous episodes, something I see a lot is you'll see books written by people who've turned their lives around, and their life story is, I was abused as a child. Do you know, I was sexually abused, or my parents were drug addicts, or they were alcoholics, or they were violent, and I suffered real trauma. And that had this impact on me. Do you know, I was a drug addict then in my adolescent years or in my young 20s, and I turned my life around, and I've redeemed my life. I've found redemption, and look at me now, I've turned it all around. And they're great stories, and I love them, and fair play to those people. But whenever I read or heard a story like that, I always thought, but that's not me. Like, I had a nice childhood. I'm from a nice middle class family in the suburbs of Liverpool. We had a detached house with a pond. I went to a nice school and a nice university, and yet when I got into my mid-30s, I was like, something's not right here. I'm fucked. I don't feel good. And as I've dug into all of this stuff and uncovered it, I'm like, yeah, I experienced trauma and neglect as a child. And the problem we have is, when we use those words, again, think about this, we'll keep coming back. In my coaching sessions, I'm always talking about these things. Core principles, we'll keep coming back to core principles, you'll hear. And one of them is language. So when we use words like trauma and neglect, we think of, being abused, being raised by drug addicts, whatever. But we almost need new language for it, because to children, trauma and neglect isn't what it is to adults. And this is where we all go wrong. And until we learn about it and hear about it, you're like, yeah, but that's just this thing. To a child, the smallest thing can be traumatic. So I'll put a little clip of a video at the end of this, which is, I think it's called the still face experiment that someone did, and I'm sure it's been done loads of times, but it's a mum talking to her baby. The baby must only be a few months old, and the mum's playing with the baby's sitting in like a high chair, mum's playing with the baby's laughing, joking, blah, blah, blah. And then the mum just turns away and suddenly turns around with a still face and just looks at the baby. Completely still face, doesn't interact. And you see within seconds the baby trying to get the mum to interact, trying to bring her in, trying to bring her back. And this kid it's actually quite upsetting to watch. The kid gets more and more distressed in the space of like a minute. This is a minute of the mum just looking at the baby with a still face and not reacting. That to a child is traumatic. Because think about it as a baby. I mentioned this in the fear episode. Think about even being a baby. By the time you come out into this world, you've had 9 months in a world you already existed in. No one ever talks about this. Like, imagine that now. You lived, the only world you know was this like perfectly temperature controlled, safe, dark place with these muffled sounds. And I joked about the food pipe in the fear episode, but that's true. Think about that. You eat and drink whenever you want. Like, there's just a pipe that comes into you and you just eat and drink whenever you want. Imagine that. It's brilliant. What a life. And then all of a sudden, you just get pulled through a vortex, sometimes physically pulled by your head, out into this bright light with all these weird people and all this loud noise. You're like, what the fuck? And people wonder why kids cry when they come out. Imagine if that happened to you now. Imagine if someone ripped you out of the world you're in, because this is the world you think but is real. And to a kid that's 9 months old, still in their mum's womb, that world is real, and then they get pulled out. So that whole experience in itself is traumatic. And then everything from that point is trauma. Loads of it's traumatic. And a good way to think about it is, when we talk about the word trauma, I read this in a great book called The Truth by Neil Strauss, and he was talking about his therapy, and this always stood out to me. He said, we talk about trauma, and what we mean is capital T, trauma, which is like 10 out of 10 on the trauma scale. That's sexual abuse, drug addicts, all of that type of real trauma and neglect. But what we're not talking about usually is small t trauma. And small t trauma is all the other stuff that happens to you as a kid that to a child is traumatic. And small t traumas that are like 1 out of 10 on the scale all add up. So if you have 10 small t traumas that are 1 out of 10 on the scale, that's the same as having a 10 out of 10 capital T trauma, but we don't talk about them. And these traumas all lead us as children to adapt our behaviour to do certain things. So again, we could talk about this all day, and I'll talk about it more as the episodes go on, rather than bombard you too much in one episode. But what happens is, we'll experience something. So look out for this now. When you start to become aware of these things, as an adult, you become conscious of them, you can see. So I can interact with my parents now as a nearly 40-year-old man, and they're in their 70s. And they will do something without even saying anything. There will just be a look on their face, body language, an energy. And I'm like, oh, I've upset them. And when that happens now as a 40-year-old man, with all the stuff I've learned, even at 37, I wasn't doing this because I hadn't learned all this stuff. I can say to them now, what's wrong? You look upset. What's happened? But think about when that happens when you're 2. That isn't what you do as a 2-year-old. You still absorb the same thing. And then think about this. It's not what the parent says, it's what the parent does. So you look at the parent sends you a message, they're not happy with this. At 2 years old, you're not able to say, sorry, mum or dad, you just look a bit disappointed in me. What was that? You just go, okay, whatever I just did then, they didn't like. And my whole life when I'm a baby, think about this. You've come out of this safe environment where you've got your food pipe. You come into this frightening new world and you learn very quickly you need these people. Like, you rely on them for everything. So we adapt as humans. We adapt to survive. So we want to keep them happy. So we learn to go, what did I just do then that upset them? Don't do that again. What do I do instead? If I do this thing, they're happy, they come to me, they bring me love. And we adapt our behaviours. We start to begin to adapt behaviours to please the people around us because we need to survive. It brings us love, it brings us safety, it brings us attention. Makes sense? And this stuff all builds up. So the purpose of this video is I wanted you to start thinking about, just for a first step, what that's like. Like going right back to the beginning, what it's like as a kid, what you were like as a kid, what the people around you were like, what were the lessons you started to learn, what are the characters, what's their behaviour, what were the lessons, what was your cereal box example. That's a really good way to start without getting too deep into it, because you can start sort of quite shallow with this stuff and then decide how deep into it you want to get, because this is a rabbit hole once you start on it. But think about what's your cereal box example to begin with. What things do you do now? And it's usually things you laugh about. Either you laugh about, or maybe with your husband or wife or partner, it's the things they go, oh, you're just like your mum or dad for that. There's the little things. It's the things as you get older, people start going, oh, you turn into your dad, you turn into your mum. And we laugh and joke about it, and it's like cliched, but we never stop to think and go, yeah, I'm turning into my mum or dad. Why? And it's because of this stuff. It goes right the way back to the beginning. Does that make sense? So this is a building blocks exercise, and I think it's something else that it's worth mentioning is, again, the trauma and neglect word. I'm always conscious of this when I talk about my own mum and dad, because my mum and dad are beautiful people. I love them to bits. Best mum and dad in the world. And none of this is a blame thing. This isn't, oh, we've got these problems now as grown-ups because our mums and dads are awful. And that's why I don't really like the words neglect and trauma for it. This is just childhood. Like, it's everybody's childhood. And what you do as you start going back through the generations, you realise this stuff is just passed down from generation to generation. This is just what we do. Think about with all the kids you've got in your life, whether they're your own kids or nieces and nephews or whatever, mates' kids. We all say and do things to kids, and it's just automatic. Like, one of the things, and we'll get into this because I talk to a lot of people about careers and the businesses they run. We say to kids all the time, what do you want to do when you grow up? Why do we ask that? Where does that come from? Because we heard it loads when we were growing up. It's just like an automatic thing. And something I want to we'll start exploring more and more is I see humans now and the production of humans as, think about it like a car production line. So we have these humans that come out in a pure form, and then we start to program them, and we build them, and we turn them into things. But what we don't realize is the way we're building humans is flawed, because the people who are building the humans were built by other people who were flawed, but we didn't know. So we build them in the same way all over and over again, and all the humans grow from little humans into big humans, and we've all got these same problems that we're carrying around, and we look around and everyone's got the same problems, so we just think it's normal, and then we build new humans with the same problems, but no one ever goes back to the beginning and says, is it the way we're building them? Imagine in a car production plant. That's why I like the analogy. If we were building cars that constantly broke down, constantly had issues in their physical structures, in their online computer systems, think about that. Like we've got society in which drug addiction's on the increase, suicide and depression's on the increase, everybody suffers with the same thing, divorces are on the increase, nobody seems to be happy in what they do, or very few people. These are things that are inbuilt to us from the start, from the processing, the manufacturing plant. And it's because for generations we've been building humans with these flaws. So our grandparents had the same things, and their parents before them, and we just keep passing it on. And the key is that once you can figure it out, and this for me is why you should teach it in schools, because when you can figure it out and when you can teach new parents about these issues, we can say, can we stop building humans like this? Because that's why they have problems later on. It's why we've got so many insecurity issues and self-esteem issues, which again, we'll talk about. Does that make sense? As I say, I'll put up a clip. I'll put up the still face experiment clip for you to have a look. See what you think of it. Let me know what you think in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. If you like this stuff and you know other people that might like it, please share it with one friend or contact or business colleague or whoever that you think might like it. This is a big topic. I'm going to keep breaking it up. It might seem a bit random how I break it up. It'll bounce around a little bit. That's my style. If I was working with you one-on-one, I'd be doing the same thing. This is the best I can do to sort of, without working one-on-one with people, to take you through this whole journey and this whole process. We'll talk in the next episodes about the next stages of this in development. You'll see how it starts to impact on the personality you become, the personality you develop, your relationships, romantic relationships, friend relationships, business relationships. It's fascinating stuff, I think. And as I say, the true root causes of all of the stuff we're going through. Hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon. Take care.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother. Like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.